Widely regarded as one of the greatest comedic artists of the screen, and indeed, one of the most important people in motion picture history, Charlie Chaplin is a legend. Rising to fame in the era of silent film, the actor, filmmaker, and composer would die a multi-millionaire in the 1970s. When the priest, who was attending Charlie on his deathbed, said, "May the Lord have mercy on your soul," Charlie quickly replied, "Why not? After all, it belongs to him." If only Charlie, or the priest, could have known what was going to happen to Charlie, well, fairly soon after he was dead and buried.
Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly.
I don't remember exactly how I got the idea that we should pair a story about Charlie Chaplin with an orange blossom cocktail, but I did read somewhere, I can't find it now, that the orange blossom was Charlie's favorite cocktail. There is a story that's a little risque for Capers and Cocktails, but let's just say that Charlie was known to have many flings with Hollywood starlets. In one case, he had an affair with actress Louise Brooks when she was 19. Anyway, this affair apparently included a 3-day bender, aided in part by liberal servings of the orange blossom. There's some debate as to whether this drink should be made with sweet vermouth or simple syrup, but we're going to do it with vermouth today because I think the beauty in this drink is in its simplicity and also in its ability to pack a punch. All right, in the name of simplicity, the cocktail is 1 part gin, 1 part sweet vermouth, 1 part orange juice, put into a shaker with ice and shaken. You'll strain it over fresh ice, garnish with an orange slice, and enjoy like Charlie Chaplin. The mocktail version is 1 part non-alcoholic gin, 1/2 part grape juice, 1 part orange juice, all in your shaker with ice. Shake, shake, shake. Strain it like the bougie person you are over fresh ice, garnish with an orange slice, and enjoy. Not like Charlie Chaplin, he liked the one with the booze. Now that you're slurping away at your own Charlie Chaplin delight, let's talk about the man, the myth, the legend, the body himself. The man who springs to mind most often when thinking about the early days of cinema is Charlie Chaplin. Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr. was born on April 16, 1889 in London to parents Hannah and Charles. Charlie grew up in relative poverty, but according to his biographer, David Robinson, his eventual trajectory was the most dramatic of all the rags to riches stories ever told. Okay. After a few vaudeville tours in America, Charlie jumped into the burgeoning world of film, making his debut in a one-reel film called Making a Living on February 2nd, 1914. However, his most culturally significant role was that of the Tramp, a screen persona he would use for several decades. By 1917, just 3 years later, it was reported that 9 out of 10 men who attended costume parties came dressed as the Tramp. Charlie, not a trained musician, also composed scores for many of his films, and indeed won his only competitive Academy Award for Best Original Score for his composition work in one of his films, Limelight. He had a unique way of making his films, almost never shooting from a complete script, but essentially improvising his shots. Consequently, Charlie took longer than most filmmakers to complete his pictures. In his personal life, Charlie Chaplin became embroiled in some scandals related to a paternity suit and affairs with much younger women. His films also had increasingly become political, and he was accused of having communist sympathies. There's like a lot of people were accused of having communist sympathies, whatever. In September of 1952, he boarded the RMS Queen Elizabeth, bound for Europe with his family. The following day, the U.S. Attorney General revoked his re-entry permit, saying he'd need to undergo an investigation to return to the USA. Despite the fact that this was a thin accusation at best, and he probably would have been able to come back, Charlie just decided never to come back to America. He would later say, "Whether I re-entered that unhappy country or not was of little consequence to me. I would have liked to have told them that the sooner I was rid of that hate-beleaguered atmosphere, the better, that I was fed up of America's insults and moral pomposity." Tell us how you really feel, Charlie. Charlie, his wife, and then 4 children would settle in Switzerland in 1953, selling his massive amount of properties and other businesses in the U.S. His 4th, And last, and then wife, Una, who, by the way, was playwright Eugene O'Neill's daughter and 36 years younger than Charlie, would renounce her U.S. citizenship and become a British citizen. They would add 4 more children to the brood for a total of 8. Charlie himself had 11 total children. Charlie Chaplin died at 4:00 a.m. on Christmas Day, 1977. He was surrounded by his wife of 34 years and 7 of his children. He was 88 years old. Charlie was interred in the Coursier-sur-Vevey cemetery after a small, private Anglican ceremony held according to his wishes. But listen, all of that is interesting, and frankly, several of the things that Charlie did in his lifetime could be considered capers in and of themselves, but that's not why we're here today. We're here because of a 24-year-old unemployed car mechanic, a Polish refugee named Roman Vardas, and a Bulgarian national, a 38-year-old named Gansko Ganev. He was also an unemployed car mechanic. 3 months after Charlie was dead and buried, on March 1st, 1978, his grave would be found empty and the coffin, the body, missing. In the dead of night, 2 men desecrated Charlie's tomb in the village graveyard and stole his coffin. Roman, you see, had a plan. Roman had left his home country of Poland, according to him, to be free, but he was unable to find steady work in Switzerland. And apparently, in the midst of his money woes, he read a newspaper article about a similar plot in Italy. And Roman lived pretty close to some folks that not only had a freshly buried body, but a lot of money. A Mrs. Una Chaplin, and many of her children. So Roman formulated a plan to dig up the coffin, remove the coffin, dig the hole where the coffin had been a little bit deeper, and then bury the coffin below where it had been, essentially hiding it further down so no one would suspect that it was down there. He would say, "I did not feel particularly squeamish about interfering with a coffin." Indeed, he would approach his friend Gansko and ask him to help dig up the coffin. Gansko would say, "I was not bothered about lifting the coffin. Death is not so important where I come from." Gansko and Roman went about the plan until it started to rain. The dirt became too heavy to continue digging a deeper hole, so they took the coffin and put it in Gansko's car. They drove about 12 miles farther down the road and then reburied the coffin. After the use of his brute strength and vehicle, Gansko was out of the plot. He was really just the body guy. Roman would make several calls to the Chaplin estate using the pseudonym Mr. Rochat. He would demand a ransom to the tune of 1,000,000 Swiss francs, or $2.3 million 2023 dollars, for the return of the body, and he would eventually threaten violence against the Chaplin children if the money wasn't turned over. Una would have nothing to do with the plot, saying, "My husband is in heaven and in my heart." She's also reported to have said, "Charlie would have thought it rather ridiculous." And for a ransom to the tune of $2.5 million, I think I'm with Charlie. Adding to the ridiculousness, evidently, was the fake accent that Roman adopted, which often made the Chaplin children laugh out loud when they heard it over the phone. The media, naturally, had a field day with the crime, some stories claiming that it was fans who had stolen Charlie's remains. Still others said that local anti-Semites had objected to Charlie, who was Jewish, being buried in a Christian burial ground. By the way, Charlie wasn't Jewish. That was some 1930s Nazi propaganda. Speaking of Nazis, some stories claimed that neo-Nazis had stolen the body to get some kind of strange revenge for a movie that Charlie released in 1941 called The Great Dictator. Now, that's a capers and cocktails of its own. We're not going to talk about that one today. Regardless, because it seems like the body snatcher and wannabe extortionist was desperate and insisted on calling Una's house like all the time, the police didn't have too much trouble catching Roman and eventually Gansko. Police tapped the family's phone line and monitored every one of the area's 200 toll booths. 11 weeks after the theft, Roman and Gansko were arrested in May of 1978. The two would lead authorities to the coffin buried in a cornfield beside Lake Geneva. After a trial, both men were found guilty. Roman Vardas was sentenced to 4.5 years of hard labor, and Gansko Ganev, because of his limited responsibility for the crime, was given an 18-month suspended sentence. According to Chaplin's son Eugene, at least one of them would write to Una and apologize. Una would write back and say, "Look, all is forgiven." Charlie Chaplin was reinterred in the Corsier Cemetery in a reinforced concrete vault, 6 inches thick, to prevent any further theft. Although, I can't imagine a second corpse-stealing plot, but better safe than sorry, I suppose. Una Chaplin died on September 27, 1991, of pancreatic cancer at the age of 66. A prolific writer, she ordered in her will that all of her writings be destroyed and never published. She was buried next to her husband in the village cemetery. One of the granddaughters of Una and Charlie, Una Castilla Chaplin, is a Spanish actress who played Robb Stark's wife in Game of Thrones, if you're into that kind of thing. I guess it runs in the family. Charlie's final home in Switzerland, Manoir de Ban, was converted into a museum named Chaplin's World, which opened in 2016. There are at least 8 statues of Charlie around the world, almost all of which depicting him as the tramp. And there's also countless different kinds of art that shows him, mostly as the tramp. Body in the grave or no, Charlie Chaplin had already solidified his place in the world's cultural lexicon. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm glad that Charlie Chaplin is at rest, finally. I'm not even going to start with the fact that Charlie Chaplin isn't even the most famous corpse to ever have been stolen, because who knows what you might see in a future season of Capers and Cocktails. I guess you're going to have to keep listening or watching. Next week, we're going to do a cocktail that also includes beer. I gotta tell you, it makes me nervous. I'm a cocktail girl, not a beer girl. If you're a beer human or a cocktail human, head to the description box to get the ingredients to add to your shopping list. Follow me on Instagram, please, and TikTok. I need more TikTok views. My TikToks are fun, I swear. I'll see you next week. And remember, there are always alternatives to stealing a dead body for the ransom money.